Laura? Hi, can you hear me okay?
So get us muted and get Dawn unmuted. And Dawn, maybe tell us a little about yourself. I haven't had the opportunity to meet you in person, but I've been reading about you on your website. So
Great.
Share with everybody.
Yeah. So my name is Dawn Bennett. I own a company called Touch Remedies. And really the reason why I'm talking about deepening your connection to self and others with healthy touch is because I got guided and spent the last 6 months writing a book on touch and the touch crisis in the United States and a lot of first world countries and how we're afraid to touch. And my goal is really to transform this touch crisis and give people the power to speak up about how they do or do not want touch, right? So it isn't just about like, oh, everyone should be touchy-feely, but it's about like, how do we ask for what we want and what we need? And how do we respect others and their boundaries as well, but without being so crazy strict that we also feel like it's not coming from our heart-centered space. I've been a massage therapist for 22 years now. But I've also done a lot of mind-body medicine. I'm a classical homeopath. I do emotional freedom techniques. So I've really expanded into not only just body work, but what is the connection between our mind and the body, and how do we express ourselves as full beings? And now my passion is to teach people how to express themselves as full beings using touch and touch communication. And that's really what I'm here to talk to everybody about tonight. Because really healthy touch communication, healthy touch can help us feel less tired, less anxious. It can help us feel more connected. It actually increases our immune system. It increases our physical well-being and our emotional well-being. And when we do touch with intention, when we create intention around our touch and communicate what we want, we need, and we ask others what they want and what they need around touch, we can really deepen our connection with others, even if it doesn't include touch, right? So if we ask somebody, would you like a hug? And they say no, at least they know that we respect them enough to ask instead of just like bombarding them with a hug, which is what I used to do. Sometimes still do, right? It's always a work in progress for everybody, I think. So really my goal for all of you tonight as well is to reflect on what is your current experience of touch? And both right now in this moment and in these weeks, but also how was it before the sequestering and the quarantine started? And also, what would you like it to be once you're able to return to your quote unquote normal life? You know, for those of you that are going back to work or are putting yourself in different situations or can go hang out with friends again and can give hugs or touch, how do you want that to look like? What, you know, because now we have an idea a time to really be within ourselves and transform how we think about touch and really tune into ourselves. What do we want? What do we need? How do we want to express that? We get to play with that a little bit within ourselves. So that way, when we get back out in the world, we can really come from a place of authenticity and a heart-centered space. So that's really my goal for everybody tonight. So just as a background, my journey with touch. So I grew up in a really touch positive family. My mom and my sister are both on the call tonight. And there was lots of hugging. There was lots of touch in the family. Touch was always a very healthy thing, right? So I got used to lots of hugs. I got used to a lot of touch. And I realized that power was really, really powerful when we touched with intention and when we touched with love. And I went to college and decided to become a massage therapist. And really through that journey of how do you touch your clients? How do you create boundaries between touch and not touch? What are the ethics of touch? How do you ask people on the table, like, can I touch you here? How are you getting what you need? Is it too hard? Is it too soft? I'm sensing you're uncomfortable. Would you like something different? And learning how to communicate that over years and years of experience, working with people who have had touch trauma in their past, whether it be neglect, whether it be abuse, whether it be, there's all kinds of ways, right, that we can experience kind of trauma around touch in different ways. And learning how to communicate that with clients and asking them to speak their power forward became really powerful for me. And I realized how much it empowered others when they were able to actually say what they wanted and what they need. And when they were, encouraged to speak it. So like even something as simple as like, would you like a blanket? Are you cold? I'm like, oh, whatever, I'm fine. No, would you like a blanket because you're cold, right? So sometimes it was even starting from not touch. It was starting from even before then. Like, please, this time is yours. Ask for what you want and what you need. And if we can do that around touch, touch is our first form of communication. Right? When you're a child, it's the first thing that you experience when you come into this world beyond breath. So it's so vital and it's so deep in our core, both as mammals, but also as humans. Right? It's our first level of communication. How are we being touched as infants? How do we reach out to others? So there's a lot of studies around touch, right? And I could go on and on and on about it forever, and I don't really want to bore everybody about it. But I just want to also point out that I think many of us are aware of how important touch is for kids, right? So from everything from, there was studies done, for example, Renee Spitz studied people in orphanages and found that, there was like one baby for every 8 nursing aides, and found that if there wasn't enough touch, they were more likely to be ill. They were more likely to die early. She actually did this really interesting study in the 1940s where she compared babies that were in orphanages versus babies whose mothers were incarcerated. So basically the babies and the mothers were both in prison. And the difference between the two is that when the babies were with their mothers in prison, they were only allowed, to be with the mothers part of the day, but they got regular touch every day, whereas the ones in orphanages were often neglected around touch. And at 4 months of age, both babies, both in the orphanages and in the institutions, were very similar, right, in their motor and intellectual skills. But after a year, the ones that were in the orphanages had less motor and intellect. They were less curious. They were less playful. And they had, on average, more infections than the infants whose mothers were in the prison and who were receiving that touch, that caring, that loving, that nurturing touch from their mothers every day versus just in the orphanages where they're just fed, bathed, perhaps changed, and then put back to be because the nurses just couldn't keep up. They couldn't provide that. At the age of 2 and 3, the children that were in the prison could talk. They were along all their normal growth rates, whereas the ones that were in the orphanages couldn't. In fact, of the 26 orphans that she studied, only 2 could walk and manage their words. And the rest were all very far behind because they weren't receiving the neurological development that happens with touch. And I think we kind of understand these studies, right? We've seen things about how kids gain birth weight, when they're born prematurely, and the Romanian projects in Bucharest, where kids, the more often they're touched, right, the better off they do. But it's even important when you're older children. So there was a study done with 7 and 8-year-olds and found that when they're roughhousing with their parents, it stimulates a chemical in the brain that improves their memory. It improves their capability to learn. And they also have better body images about themselves. So even something that some of us consider more violent, like roughhousing, right, helped them feel strong. It helped them, those 7 and 8-year-olds, feel connected, feel a part of something. Right. Tiffany Field, who is a researcher at the Institute of Touch in Miami, at the University of Miami, she did cross-cultural studies in the United States, in France, in Germany, and found that the more often someone was touched from the age 13 and before, the less likely they were to be violent when they were older. So there's actually a positive correlation between being touched and being less violent, because they understood the social stigma of positive and healthy touch, and they were more compassionate. So it's very interesting now that we're seeing all these no touch policies come into play, and this huge increase of violence in our youth as well. But even when we look at college students, there was a study done by Nicolas Guggen in France, and he had a professor bring all of his students up, the college students up, and he found that if the professor tapped the student on the shoulder just once, like, oh, nice job, or whatever, while the student was performing an equation on the board or demonstrating an equation on the board, they were 19% more likely to volunteer again to answer another question. And perhaps some of you have heard, oh, waitresses were, are taught to touch your clients just once because their tips are increased. Right? There's a study done on the NBA that showed a positive correlation, the National Basketball Association. The more often the teams touch, whether it be high fives or fist bumps or little slaps in the bum, the more often they did that in the preseason, the more likely they were to work as a team, and the more successful they were as a team in the actual season. So there was a positive correlation. And that's after they did all the adjustments for the normal, this basketball team is really great and that basketball team is not so great. So they did all the adjustments of the normal stats to see how much better were they just through the increased touch. Because touch does a lot to us chemically. So when we get touch, we release the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin increases trust by 44%, they found in studies. 44%. That's huge. So if you're in a business, if you have a friendship, if you're forming bonds with somebody and you touch them with intention and with respect, they're 44% more likely to create a trusting bond with you. Touch also decreases sensitivity to social exclusion. They did, I love this study. So they had people playing adults playing video games basically, right? So it's this team video game and but they were playing against a computer, but they thought they were playing against another human. And so they measured these adults, like, how engaged are you in this game? And they played it out as, oh, we're trying to learn if this is a good game for adults, right? But what they did is eventually this team game where they were kind of playing against each other, the other person stopped interacting with them, the real person, right? The computer stopped interacting with the person as often. And it was shown that the person playing the game started feeling more excluded, started feeling more down on themselves, that maybe they did something wrong, right? So they started pulling back. But if the researcher came up and touched them, that was changed and they didn't feel excluded. So it also increases our ability to social bond, to feel less excluded, which is really important right now in our days because Cigna, who's a company, in 2008 did a study, it's called the Loneliness Index Study. And 46% of adults reported feeling alone all or most of the time. And something I can't remember, like 48%, it's pretty close, also felt like people didn't care about them, right? That they actually had no strong connection with another adult. It's up by 40% from 2000. So we've changed that much in our society of how we're feeling connected because we're not touching anymore. We're afraid to touch. We're not using that as a good form of communication. Any questions so far?
You know, Don, I think about, play a role in corporate America, and a couple times a year we have to certify the sexual harassment policy. And, you know, there's so much, I guess, kind of fear instilled that don't touch your team members. You know, it's inappropriate in the office. I just would be curious about your thoughts about that.
Mm-hmm. There's actually, it's really interesting because it is different based upon the company, the company culture and the type of work that you do. Like if you look at a lot of the creative companies like Google, graphic design companies, they did a bunch of research and like 40% of the people say it's common for them to hug their coworkers, right? Because that's part of the creative process. They're more right brain, they're more interactive. And that's definitely not the percentage when you look at like an insurance company or most of the corporate culture where you're taught, you don't even know if it's appropriate to give a handshake anymore sometimes, right? And there is a social stigma around it that can be hard to overcome. And so what I encourage people to look at is if you have people on the same level of you, right? It gets a little bit more complicated when we start looking at manager versus, coworker, when you start getting different levels of hierarchy, that can be more tricky because then you do have to be more careful. But what usually tends to be okay is the person on quote unquote, the lower status can reach up to the person in higher status and say, is it okay if I, touch you on the arm? Is it okay if I, give you a hug? But not the other way around, right? Because of that power differential. And that's where things can start getting really, really tricky. But with coworkers, it all comes down to good communication and asking in a way that allows the other person to say no. So for example, if I say, can I have a hug? I'm asking for a hug. I'm saying, well, will you hug me? And you still get to make the choice. But if I say, would you like a hug? It's a little bit different because now I'm actually asking you in a certain way if I can touch you and if that's something that you want. So now instead of you giving me something, feeling like, well, I'm Minnesota nice, so I'm going to give you a hug because you asked for one, even though I might not really want to, or I'm a little awkward about it. People seem to be able to say no a little bit more strongly. If you say, well, would you like a hug? Not really. And especially if you give options like, would you prefer a hug or a handshake? Would you prefer just a handshake or would you prefer it if I touch you on the back of the hand or touch you on the arm while we talk? Or would you prefer no touch at all? So if you're asking the other person, what would they like? What makes them happy? Right? Where's their power? You're giving them their power and it shows a different level of respect.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else in the group? Do you have any comments or questions you'd like to ask Dawn at this point? So you just have to unmute yourself. Or raise your hand and I can unmute you.
Well, I work on, my name is Suzanne and I work with, typically I do, but right now we're closed at an adult day program with seniors and people with disabilities too.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people have dementia. So, or, most of them I would say. And what I do is just stand behind them and kind of touch their backs, just to show that I'm there for them and with them. And I never thought about asking, but I suppose I could do that too.
But some cultures don't require asking. So it depends upon your culture, because if you have a good enough bond with them and that's part of what's already happening, asking might actually create an awkwardness around it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of that. It's really, we try to be really caring and warm and, that they want to come every day and it's to have fun and connection with people. So I figured touch would be a good way to do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And
4% more. Wow, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
the 44% more connection
Yeah.
that people feel.
I know. It's
You're going to say something. I interrupted.
Oh no, it's fine. No, I love hearing the feedback.
So
It's interesting because it is such a good form of communication. I have not found solid research, but I've seen a lot of articles and stuff that have talked about how in dementia and mental care, it actually keeps the people a little bit more in the present when they're getting touched, because it keeps them from going away. And the more often they're touched, the more cognizant they tend to be. Do you see that to be true?
I do. I know sometimes, especially people that have a more difficult time with understanding things, if you're there and you touch them, they seem more relaxed and less anxious and more involved, less removed from the group. I think it's really a helpful thing. Yeah.
I love it.
Good to know.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
how do you approach someone who is kind of touch averse? Doesn't care for touch, and you know that it's important, but they just don't care for it.
And that's the thing. It's about building up trust. And sometimes, if people are touch averse, they usually have a reason, right? Maybe there's been a boundary violation, or maybe they're just not used to touch. Because what can happen, and I found this to myself as well when I was in Europe, right? So here I'm a massage therapist. I have a lot of friends. I'm touching and I'm hugging them all the time. And then I go to Europe and I'm like, no touch, basically. And so at first I went through this like grief, like I'm not touching anybody. I don't feel connected. I don't feel I can express myself. But then I got so used to not touching that when I came back from Europe and I stayed with my friends, they were giving me hugs and they were touching me, they're walking by me. And I also was just like, this is too much. Like I am overwhelmed with the amount of touching I'm getting. So sometimes it's also about, the situation, how much is your body actually used to it, and how much stimulation can you take? So Ian, to answer your question, it really depends upon the person and where they're coming from. But I think just asking is really always the right way. Just say like, hey, I know you don't like touch, but would you do you like being touched on the arm, or do you don't want to be touched at all? Would you like a hug? Would you like a high five? Or would you just prefer that I listen to you and actually engage you with my eyes? Because for some people, that's enough. That's almost like being touched. If someone's actually just really listening and paying attention and is really present with their energy, for some people, that's like being touched because they don't experience that very often. So it can be even to that level. Does that answer your question a little bit?
It does, yes. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, so there is a touch crisis in our culture. When we're not touched, and the more lonely that people are, I shouldn't say when we're not touched, but people are found to be, in general, more lonely when they're not touched. Right? And loneliness has the same impact on the mortality rate as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, according to a study by the University of Montreal. Because we're not getting the oxytocin, touch also releases serotonin, which is a feel-good hormone. It releases dopamine, which also helps the neurotransmitters move, and it decreases cortisol. And cortisol is one of the stress hormones. It's a fight-flight hormone, right? It keeps us in a heightened state. And so touch can bring that down. And the cool thing about when cortisol comes down is it brings us into that relaxed state, or that parasympathetic state, for those of you that know that term. But it brings us into what they call the rest and digest. When our body is in that state, we also have better immunity. Because when you think about it, we have two states. We have our rest state and we have our fight-flight state. Right? And our bodies are still as if we're Neanderthals a little bit. So what does your body want to do when there's a tiger? Does it want to be fighting the flu, or does it want to be running away from the tiger? Right? So when you're in fight, flight, and you're running from that tiger, your body's not fighting that flu. Your body's not fighting that cancer. Your body's not fighting that whatever it is that we're dealing with, right? So touch is one of the many tools that we can use in order to bring ourselves back into our body, bring ourselves back into that calm state, so we can build our immunity, so we can have better neurotransmission, so we can have that feel-good oxytocin, we can build trust and social bonds and community and not feel excluded. They're saying right now the Generation Zers, which are the like 18 to 22-year-olds right now, are rating themselves lonelier on a scale than any other US demographic ever has. And worse than, I think a lot of us think, I know I do, but that the older generations, like the people that are in the nursing homes and stuff, that they're the ones that are lonely. But they're building bonds, and the Generation Zers are not building bonds. In fact, they're seeing, on average, they're seeing 40% less of each other than other people that age used to, even in my generation. Because so much is done over technology now. Right? So they're not feeling, 54% of like Generation Zers said they felt that nobody knows them very well. 54%. So how can we teach kids? How can we teach Generation Zers, the millennials, and people in our own generation to start touching again, to start using it to build our cultures, our communities, even on a small level? And it really starts with us. And step one is, what is your want and need? What were you trained in touch? Right? Were you taught when you were young that touch is bad and it's only sexual? Were you taught, that it's against your religion to touch? There's all these touch messages that we get depending upon where you grew up, how touchy your family was or not, right? What kind of touch challenges you've had throughout your lives and various relationships. All of these things form how we think about touch. But you have an opportunity now to look back at that and say, okay, what do I believe about touch now? How do I want touch to be part of my life? And how can I make that a reality? How can I ask for what I want and need? So step one is really, what is your inner touch terrain? Right? What do you want? What prevents you from reaching out for more touch if you want? Because these beliefs are really inset when we're young, right? Really set in through our society. Right now, one of the things that we all know is that a lot of us are fearful to touch, and especially kids, right? There's a lot of no touch policies in schools. There was a statement put out by the National, it's NAYEC, and I always forget. It's the National Advocates of Youth and Education of Children, something like that, right? But they're a nationwide organization that basically looks at what should the policies be nationwide in schools, how should kids be treated, la, 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 la. They put out a statement 10 years ago saying that they believe no touch policies are harmful to children, because they're turned away when they do try to touch their teachers. So they're taught that they're not able to do that. And they don't learn the social skills of communication because you're taught, don't touch, don't touch, don't touch. You can't touch them. All that's wrong. And so they start feeling that what they're doing is wrong. They can't show affection. They can't be compassionate to other people. And they don't learn the social skills of, when I do touch now, how is that person receiving it? So they get older and they have no idea how to read other people around how that person is accepting their touch, which then creates even further complications in relationships, especially when you start looking at intimate relationships, right? Which is a whole other subject in itself that I'm not going to get into today. But if you're never taught about what feels good to you around touch, because you weren't taught except for like, don't hit me, right? Stop hitting me, stop biting me. Right? When you're 5 or 4, I don't know, Kathy, you tell me, how long did I bite you for until, when we were kids? But it's true, like, huh?
You were in high school and you still would come and bite me. You would come and bite me saying, I just felt like biting you.
But she taught me that she didn't like that. But it's true, right? So much of our engagement and how we touch, we learn and how we get touched when we're young. How hard, how soft, where do we like to be touched? What does it feel like when someone isn't touching us with intention versus when they are touching us with intention? What's the difference between someone hitting us and someone touching us with love and respect? So we learn all these, not only in our mind, but actually by the physical sense. And when we take that away from our children with all these no-touch policies, the only thing they're getting then is the push away, like touch is bad. And then they're only getting the quote unquote negative touch when they're getting into fights on playgrounds or that kind of thing, unless they have a lot of touch communication at home. So it's very interesting how this is starting to shift our culture as a whole. So kind of the second step is, once you know how you touch and what your beliefs are around touch and what you want your beliefs to be, now you get to strategize. What is my intention when I touch others? What's my intention in safety? That's kind of what I call it, right? How do I make myself safe, and how do I make other people feel safe around touch? Okay. So when I was, so this is in 2011, I had a wellness center. I did a lot of massage. I had 13 employees, and my wellness center won Service Business of the Year. And I was super excited. I was at this business event, and I went up in front, and on the way back, after giving my speech and getting my award, I hugged a whole bunch of my friends in the audience, right? Because it's just what I do. Like, I know my people. I hug my people on the way back. And a couple weeks later, a woman sat me down and told me that I should not be touching anybody at business events, that I was completely inappropriate, completely unprofessional, and that I really need to stop touching people, right? And completely shamed me about it. And that is actually kind of what started this conversation for myself, because I had to rethink everything that I thought about touch at business level, in a personal level, at a professional level. How did other people perceive me? So even though all the people that I knew, and I talked to a lot of them, I said, did I do anything wrong? I'm sorry if I did something wrong. And they're like, no, you were just being yourself. You're fine. Right? But still, it changed how I touched my clients. It changed how I wanted to be touched. Like the shame sat in me for such a long period of time that I had to find a new way to create intention and safety for myself around touch. So I just stopped automatically hugging most of my clients. Like, I kind of knew which one of my massage clients I thought liked hugs and didn't. And some of them always reached out to me and some of them didn't, right? But I had to re-strategize. I had to start asking, would you like a hug after your session? You know, how do you feel about that? And then how do I create my own boundaries around that? And for some people, it was extra awkward because I had these dual relationships. Like, oh, when I see her and we drink wine together, of course we hug, but we don't hug at my practice. Well, why is that? What makes it different? And who created that boundary? Did she create that boundary, or did I create that boundary because of my shaming experience? So I want you to think as you go through your daily, you know, once we're allowed to go back in the culture and touch again, what is your intention with people around touch? How do you want it to look, and how do you make it safe for them? How can you ask them in a way or invite them in a way that feels comfortable for both of you, but also natural and authentic? Right? So don't just go and ask everybody, would you like a hug, if it doesn't feel authentic for you. Find your own words, find your own place. It was really interesting. When I came back from Europe, I told you I was a little bit overwhelmed with touch. But then I got used to touch again. And I was staying with my parents for a little bit. And I remember this one day in the kitchen, I walked out and I was getting ready to go to work, and my dad was getting his eggs all ready and stuff. And I was like, oh, I just really want to like a lovely hug from my dad before I go to work. And I was like, all right, well, I got to go to work. And I went to give him a hug, and he's kind of like, okay, bye, have a nice day. And he kind of gave me like a pat on the back. And internally, I went, like, all my internal child came out. And I was like, I want a real hug. And then I got super sad, but I didn't want to say it, right? Because I'm an adult. I'm like, I'm not going to ask him to set down his toast and eggs and get a real hug. I'm much more mature than that. So I just, grabbed my banana and walked out the door as if I was all proper and adult. So it's interesting because I think all of us, even with people we're really safe with, can forget to just really be present and ask for what we want. So I challenge you to do that right now when you're in your spaces. Find a way that you can really be present with what do you want around touch and how do you ask for it? And if you've asked for it before and you've heard a no, maybe there's a different way that you can ask for it. Or maybe the answer wouldn't be no this time. Because I know that's true sometimes for me. Sometimes I just say no instead of saying yes to the person and no to the touch. Does everybody kind of understand what I mean by that? Yeah. So there's a way, if you're feeling that you don't want to touch, you can still say yes to the person. Right? I would love to give you a hug, but I'm in the middle of dinner. Can we hug later? Or, you know what, I'm a little bit touched out right now, or I'm a little bit nervous because I'm not sure if I'm sick. Do you mind if we just elbow bump or high five or whatever? So there's a way that you can acknowledge what the other person is trying to offer or trying to get, right? Because sometimes it is. We all know people that are just trying to take touch in a certain way from us, right? Take that energy. So you can acknowledge that. Like, I hear you. I know this is what you want, but this is not what's good for me at this moment, right? So say yes to the person, but no to the touch. So with people that you don't like the way that they touch, it can be just as simple as that. Like, I love it that you love to give me a hug all the time, but I just prefer not to give hugs like this at work, or I just prefer to have a little bit more space. Or will you please just ask me every time so I'm more prepared and I can make a choice day by day? Because then it shows that you respect their need, but it also shows that you're respecting yourself. And that alone can create a lot of trust and bonding. So when we're touched by another person, our brain isn't necessarily set up to give objective qualities of touch unless we're really thinking about it. They did this, there's this great study on touch that John Cohen did, one of the researcher, and he had men and women with a list of 11 different types of touch, or 11 different emotions. So like anger, sadness, fear, and was supposed to try to communicate through a 1-second touch the emotion. And the other person had to guess what it was. And believe it or not, 60% of the time, the other person got it right. Which is interesting. When you think about 11 different things, it's 60% of the time is much stronger. It's way beyond what the actual statistics of just guessing would be. Right? Because there's a way that our brain recognizes qualities of touch and the energy, the intention of touch. So we can change touch that feels dangerous into touch that is healthier by making sure we're communicating well what we need. You know, I don't mind if you hug me, but I want you to hug me with intention, or I need a little more space. Right? Or if you set your touch. And I can't remember right now. There was a difference between, there was 2 types of touch. One of them was, I think it was that everybody had a hard time figuring out. And I want to say it was when a man was being compassionate to a woman, she got it right like 0% of the time. And when a woman was trying to touch with anger towards a man, he got it right like 0% of the time. So there are these weird little anomalies of the ways that genders don't communicate touch cross gender very well, which is kind of funny. So once you know where you're coming from, right? What do you have in touch? How do you create your safety intent? Then also, what do you want? What do you need? Right? How do you create your ideal physical contact with each individual person? And I challenge you now, whether you're alone or whether you're with other people, to try to find a way. How do you create your ideal physical contact with everybody that you interact with? Whether that be a tap on the shoulder, a high five. How do you create that compassion? How do you create that connection with others? How do you give your full attention to your child when you're hugging them, or your significant other who you've been hugging for 50 years? How do you make that not just something that you're doing again, but how do you bring your intention back to it so that you're getting the touch that you want, you're giving them the touch that they want in a way that feels like consensual? And then how can you be curious about it? And how can you create curiosity in others? Come with compassion, communication, and commit to trying to engage others with touch. One of the things I used to tell people, I used to speak about this at women's groups. And if you're in a group of people, right, and maybe you don't know some of them, maybe you're in the stands watching, you know, your kids or your nephews or your grandkids' soccer game or something, right? And there's always that person in the stand who's on their phone, who seems really disengaged. What if that person wants to be engaged but doesn't know how to communicate with anybody around them? And so they're using their phone as a way to hide. What would it look like if something cool happened on the field and you just tapped them and said, "Oh my gosh, did you see that? Give me a high five." Because you give that person an opportunity to engage with you. And you can try to strike up a conversation, or you can try to engage them in some way. You can try to make them part of. And maybe that person is actually just really hates being there and just needs to answer work emails and is going to go right back to it. And that's okay. Don't take anything personally, because it's not about you. But what if they really want to engage and just feel really awkward because their perception is that everybody knows everybody else and they're the only ones sitting there by themselves? So wouldn't it be fun just to use a little bit of touch like that? To get them engaged, to help them bond with you, to help them feel part of the community. One of the presentations I gave about this in California, a woman was like, "You know, I do Meals on Wheels every week, and I never thought about asking all those people that are alone by themselves at their house if they would like to have a hug." And she started doing that. And she said she emailed me and she's like, "I feel so much happier doing it. And they are so much more excited to see me." Right? So how can we be curious? How can we bring more of that commitment to be compassionate towards others who may be feeling excluded, who may feel like nobody cares about them, who may feel, you know, that they're not part of? And obviously touch isn't the only way, right? Sometimes just a gentle smile and a hello and good eye contact or listening is all you need. But finding a playful way, like, "Oh, give me a high five. Hey, do you high five? Do you fist bump?" You know, you see all those videos of teachers who have their special handshakes with all their students. Those students tend to perform better. They tend to pay more attention in class. They tend to enjoy what they're doing because they feel like that teacher actually cares about who they are as an individual, because there's this little special thing that that teacher has paid attention to. That teacher has chosen to engage with each individual. So how can you make that same commitment of choice to engage with the people that you already know and love and make them feel even tighter in your community? And the ones that are new into your community and your workspace, how can you try to engage them with or without touch? And then fifth is how do you bring this larger into your community? But also, how do you be respectful as well culturally, right? There's a lot of cultural things that sometimes we have to work with, right? Like Muslims, it's okay if men hold hands and women hold hands, but men and women are not supposed to cross touch, right? Cross gender touch. It's forbidden, right? So it's also about asking. I remember when I was in Sweden, I had this German couple I was talking to all night. And so at the end of the night, like I really wanted to hug them because we talked about all these great things. They invited me to their house. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just want to give them a hug. But I didn't know if it was culturally appropriate because Germans are can be very staunch and very proper and very. So I just said, because I wanted to be playful about it and I didn't want to be awkward. So I just said, so how do Germans say goodbye? Like, do they hug? Do they handshake? Do I give you a high five? What do I do? And the woman was great. She goes, oh, I would love to hug you. She just gave me this like lovely hug, right? So you can be playful with it, right? Be curious and just allow that space to open up in whatever way feels really authentic for you. So I know we've only got like 10 minutes left, so I just want to kind of open it up for any questions again before I go. I mean, I could talk forever about this. That's why I wrote a book, right?
I unmuted everybody, so if anyone would like to contribute or ask a question, please do so.
So Don, do you think society has just become less aware of the importance? So they see it as, they don't see it, as necessary so much.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think in a certain way, because we're not taught about the benefits of touch. We're only taught about the fears of being sued, like my dad was on a playground and a kid fell. I don't remember the exact story, but like a kid fell and the woman next to him said, I'm not touching somebody else's kid, right? So a kid's hurt and the woman's like, I'm not going to touch the kid. And then my dad's like, well, I probably shouldn't touch the kid either then if she's not going to touch the kid, right? So we've also lost our compassion around just the community around touch. But yeah, I definitely think that we don't take an opportunity to look at the science behind it.
Don, question from the chat. Can we talk about our need for touch during this time, especially if we live alone?
Yes. Yes. So I know a lot of people that are very high touch. They need a lot of touch and they're not able to touch anybody right now. So there's a couple things that you can do, like literally self hugs, right? And just like snuggling or finding a bear, like literally that will start increasing your hormonal levels. And I know it sounds weird to just hug yourself, but try it. Just like really and be present with it. Don't just like, oh, I'm hugging myself. Okay, whatever. Like really, like what do you like? Or you can play with, so you can play with enjoying touch with your own self. This is also a self-exploration of how do you like touch? So for example, I can take this pen and like, is there a way that I can make this pen feel good on my hand? How about this stapler? Oh, I kind of like that smooth feeling, right? But even that kind of touch and bringing your own intention into your own nerve senses will actually also start increasing the oxytocin. So you can find ways to play with that. And depending upon, your susceptibility and things like that, I do know some people that live alone, and they'll take one other person that lives alone and they'll just be touch partners. They'll go out for walks together, or they'll be like, this is, now you are, as if we're living together, but we're not. You are the one person I'm going to hug, right? So you may be able to find a partner like that if that's something that's comfortable with you. So you get a little bit of those touch needs met. Hopefully that answers the question.
Probably the same one.
Yeah. Dawn, I saw your hand kind of.
That was part of my question. I wanted to also thank you so much. I love the idea of asking people for options about, like, would you like a handshake or a hug? Or like, my thing is usually, are you a hugger? And then respecting what the answer is and not feeling hurt or anything, just like, okay, cool, that's your thing, and so on. I guess the other question I have is, now that we're in this place of sequester and quarantine, and I feel like maybe the no touching thing might go on for a while, even when we're on the other side of this.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen, like, as we were leading into it, right before we went into quarantine, I saw some people kind of paying attention to that. And we were doing things like, doing like a bow to one another or namaste. At one point, we were like scratching each other on the back. And so I just wonder, what do you think will happen on that other side? And do you have any ideas for what that could look like?
I actually read a few articles. One of them said social distancing is here to stay. And it talked about how this article said, I don't believe people are going to be comfortable touching in the same way ever again because the fear is so strong and it's so deeply set in our minds right now. And I think that just provides us another level of challenge of really communicating around touch, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're out of quarantine. Things are safer. And did you know touch boosts your immune system? You know what? It makes you feel more calm. It actually helps your immunity. It actually raises your antibody levels. Would you like a hug? It helps you can be playful. So hugs help your immune system. Would you like a hug? And there are studies out there that show that, actually.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's definitely a set intention. Yeah, go ahead, Laura. Sorry.
It's interesting when you said about, it kind of ties into what Ian said too, but I remember my niece, who I think is part of that Generation Z, or just real close to it. And when it was time for she and her friends from school to get their driver's license, no one seemed to care about it. And I remember what a rite of passage that was for me. And oh my gosh, it was independence and I could go hang out with my friends. And her answer was, well, we could just FaceTime each other. And so I just thought that was very interesting about what you said about Generation Z and what Ian, what you said about her. Is it just, kind of are we moving away from that in some way as a society? So very interesting.
Yeah. And I think it'll take effort to keep touch in our society, especially now. So there you are. Now you can all make an effort.
Very helpful. Any other questions for Dawn? Dawn, can you tell us about your new book?
Yeah, so I have a book called The Touched Crisis. It's about navigating the tricky terrain of bringing healthy touch back into our culture. And it's basically the science and the soul of touch. Not only my stories around touch and things I've gone through in my life, but what I learned from it, how I learned to adapt, how I learned to bring healthy and healthier touch into my own life and into lives of my friends and my clients and my communities. It should be coming out late May, early June. All my test readers are reading it right now. So it depends upon what how many edits I have to make after that. And then I'm going to be reaching out as well for some endorsements. But yeah, that it'll be coming out. So you can, if you want, you can go to my website, touchremedies.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll be sending out when the book's getting ready, or, send me your email and I'll put you in or whatever. But I'm really excited. I think it's a good time for this book to come out because it is a time that we need to be more conscious and we need to start educating people on why touch is really important for us as a culture, to decrease the loneliness, the suicide, the depression rates, the feeling like nobody's a part of anything anymore.
Yes, and tomorrow I'll send out the Zoom replay of this call, Dawn, and I'll put your email on there and I'll put your website so people can find you again and find out more from the awesome information you shared tonight, and more I'm sure that is going to come from you in the year. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you taking the time out and spending some time with us tonight. For all of those who are celebrating the holiday tomorrow or not, or you have a special guest tomorrow night, Frank Christina, who is going to do a singing bowl. I won't say concert, but anyways, a very relaxing, meditative singing bowl. So we'd love for you to join us tomorrow night, and thanks for being here tonight. And everybody stay safe and healthy.
Thanks,
Thank
Laura.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Really, really great.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Good luck.